He ignored her once. Just a girl selling tissues outside a glass tower. Minutes later, she handed him one not to sell, but to help. That small choice forced a billionaire to stop, look back, and face the quiet cost of walking past a child who never asked to be seen. The glass building rose like a wall of mirrors reflecting the morning sun, and everyone who walked past it except the ones no one ever looked at. Lila stood near the edge of the sidewalk, just far enough not to block anyone. She held a small bundle of tissue packs against her chest, stacked neatly, corners aligned as if order could protect them from the world. She didn't call out, didn't wave, didn't step into anyone's path. She had learned that people disliked being stopped, so she waited for eye contact. And when it didn't come, she waited again. The crowd moved fast, heels, clicking phones, ringing voices, clipped and urgent. Adults with somewhere to be. Lila took one small step forward, lifted a tissue pack slightly, then lowered it again when the man in front of her shook his head before she even spoke. She nodded, stepped back, made space. To Lila, rejection wasn't new. It was routine, like the traffic light changing colors. Across the street, a black car slowed as it approached the building's entrance. Ethan Cole sat in the back seat, phone pressed to his ear, eyes fixed on the schedule glowing on his screen. Meetings stacked on meetings, numbers, deadlines. A security guard opened the door for him. "Morning, Mr. Cole." Ethan stepped out mid-sentence, already moving forward. That was when Lila raised the tissue pack. He didn't look at her, didn't slow down. He simply lifted his hand in a brief, practiced motion, no irritation, no cruelty. Just dismissal, like brushing dust from a sleeve. And then he was gone. Lila lowered her arm. She didn't sigh, didn't frown. She just stepped back into her spot and waited for the light to change again. The car stopped at the red light. Inside the city, noise faded into a muted hum. Ethan leaned back against the leather seat and closed his eyes for half a second longer than he intended to. The call had ended. The silence stayed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded tissue, creased, thin, barely holding together. He pressed it to his eyes without thinking. The pressure in his chest surprised him. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like exhaustion that had nowhere left to go. Outside the window, the world kept moving. Then a shadow appeared beside the car. Ethan opened his eyes. The little girl stood there just outside the window, the same one from the sidewalk. For a brief moment, he tensed, expecting persistence, another attempt to sell. Instead, she held out a single tissue. Not the pack, just one. She didn't knock, didn't speak loudly. Her voice, when it came, was soft enough to be carried away by the traffic. "Sir, you can use this." Ethan froze. She wasn't asking for money, wasn't offering a deal. She was offering help. "I bring them," she added after a pause, eyes lowered, "so I can give them to people first." The light turned green. The driver glanced back, waiting. Ethan hesitated. Then the car moved forward. In the rearview mirror, the girl grew smaller, still standing there, one hand empty, now the other, holding the remaining tissues close. Ethan looked down at the tissue in his hand, and for the first time that morning, something didn't feel right. By the time Ethan reached the top floor, the image of the girl hadn't left him. Not during the meeting. Not during the numbers on the screen. Not even when people nodded at his decisions like they always did. He kept seeing the way she stood, careful not to take up space. Later that afternoon, he asked the building's front desk casually, as if it didn't matter. "There's a girl who sells tissues outside sometimes," he said. "Is that allowed?" The receptionist hesitated. "She's usually fine," she replied. "She's very polite. Usually." Well, the woman lowered her voice. "We remind her not to stand too close. She understands. And her parents." Ethan asked. The receptionist shook her head. "I don't think she has anyone. But she's good, quiet, doesn't cause trouble." A pause. "So we don't really worry," she added. You know, she's a good kid. The words settled heavily in Ethan's chest. Good kid. Quiet. Doesn't cause trouble. That evening, Ethan drove back past the building. He slowed the car. He looked toward the sidewalk. The spot where Lila usually stood was empty. No tissues. No small figure waiting patiently for someone to notice. Just people walking by exactly as before. And for the first time, Ethan felt the sharp, uncomfortable thought that followed him home. What if I was too late to look back? The next morning, Lila arrived earlier than usual. The air was colder, sharper against her cheeks. She tucked her hands into the sleeves of her thin jacket and stood in her usual spot 2 steps away from the glass doors, never closer. She arranged the tissue packs carefully. Straight lines, no clutter. People began to arrive in waves. Shoes, suits, voices that didn't slow down. Some nodded politely. Most didn't see her. A security guard stepped out of the building and glanced around, his eyes landing on Lila for just a second longer than before. Hey, he said not unkindly. You can't stand here today. Lila looked up, startled. I'm sorry, sir. There's a complaint, he added, already sounding tired. You'll need to move further down. Or not be here. She nodded quickly. Too quickly. Yes, sir. I understand. She bent down, gathered the tissues, checking the ground twice, as if she might have dropped something important. Just, not today, okay, the guard said. You're a good kid. Don't make trouble. Good kid. Lila smiled faintly, as if that explained everything. She stepped away from the entrance and walked toward the corner of the block where fewer people passed, and shadows stayed longer. She didn't cry. Didn't argue. She simply chose a spot where she wouldn't be noticed again. Behind the glass doors, people kept walking in and out. None of them saw the small space that had quietly disappeared. Ethan didn't plan to look for her. He told himself that. Still, his eyes scanned the sidewalk as the car slowed near the building. She wasn't there. He leaned forward, gaze sweeping the area near the entrance, the bench, the traffic light. Nothing. Stop here, he said suddenly. The driver hesitated but pulled over. Ethan stepped out and walked toward the front desk, trying to sound casual again. The girl from yesterday, he said. The one with the tissues. The receptionist looked up. Oh. She's not allowed right there anymore. Why, someone complained, she replied. Nothing serious. She was polite about it. Polite again. So where is she now? The receptionist shrugged. Probably moved on. She usually does, usually. Ethan walked back outside and headed down the block. Past cafes, past shop windows, past people who didn't look down. Then he saw her. Lila stood near the alley entrance, half hidden by a parking sign. Fewer people passed there. Fewer chances. She held the tissues closer now, as if shrinking would make her safer. Ethan stopped a few feet away. She noticed him immediately and straightened. I'm sorry, she said before he spoke. I didn't mean to stand there. Something twisted in his chest. I wasn't here to complain, he replied. She nodded anyway. I understand. That was the problem. She always did. The next day, Lila didn't come back. Ethan noticed before the driver even slowed the car. The spot was empty. The corner, too. He checked again on his way out that evening. Still nothing. A quiet unease settled in him, heavier than he expected. He asked the security guard. She didn't come today, the guard said. Maybe someone told her not to anymore. Did she do something wrong? Ethan asked. The guard shook his head. No. She never does. Then why did it feel like something had gone wrong? Ethan walked the block himself this time, past the alley, past the cafe, past the place she'd been pushed to. No sign of her. Only then did he notice something small near the curb, a single tissue, folded neatly, left behind. He picked it up, staring at it longer than necessary. For the first time, it occurred to him not as a passing thought, but as a weight he couldn't shake. That being quiet had made Lila invisible, and his silence had helped. Ethan didn't sleep well that night. It wasn't a nightmare, just a series of half-awake moments where the image of a folded tissue kept appearing in his mind over and over again like a message he hadn't answered. The next morning, he left earlier than usual. Not for work. He walked the streets himself without a suit jacket, without a driver moving slower than the crowd for once. He checked the corner first, then the alley, then the bus stop down the block. Nothing. He stopped at a small convenience store where the cashier had a clear view of the sidewalk. "Have you seen a little girl selling tissues around here?" Ethan asked. The cashier thought for a moment. The quiet one, yes. "She comes by sometimes," the man said. "Doesn't stay long. She just stands, then leaves." "Where does she go?" The cashier shrugged. "Down that way, toward the old overpass." The overpass. Ethan followed the direction, the city slowly changing as he walked. Glass buildings gave way to brick walls, offices to storage lots. Noise softened into distance. Under the shadow of the overpass, the air felt colder. That was where he saw her. Lila sat on the concrete ledge, legs pulled close to her chest, tissues arranged beside her. She wasn't selling. She was counting. 1, 2, 3. She looked up and froze when she saw him. For a second her eyes flicked around, searching an instinct, not a plan. "I didn't come back," she said quickly. "I know." Ethan held up his hands. "I'm not here to send you away." She didn't answer. She just nodded the same way she always did. He noticed her shoes, thin, worn, damp at the edges. He noticed how she sat close to her things like they might disappear if she moved. "What are you counting?" he asked. She hesitated. "People who stop," she said quietly. "If it's less than 5, I go somewhere else." "How many today?" She glanced at the ground. 2. Something in Ethan's chest tightened. He realized then this wasn't a child waiting to be helped. This was a child calculating how invisible she was allowed to be. They sat in silence for a while. Cars passed overhead, rumbling across the bridge like distant thunder. Ethan didn't rush the moment. He had learned too late that rushing was how people missed things. "Do you come here every day?" he asked gently. Lila shook her head. "Only when there are too many people there." "At the building?" "Yes, why?" She shrugged. "People get busy." It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. Ethan leaned back against the concrete wall. "Where do you go after this?" Lila hesitated longer this time. "Sometimes the library steps," she said. "Sometimes the bus station. Depends. Depends on what?" "If they ask questions," she replied. "What kind of questions, like where I'm from, or who I'm with? And that's bad." She shook her head slowly. "It's not bad. It just takes time." Time. Ethan thought about how easily he spent it, how carefully she avoided using it. "You don't have anyone?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Lila looked at her hands. "I have places," she said after a moment. It was the saddest thing he'd heard all day. And the tissues, he asked. "Why tissues?" She smiled faintly. "They're light. People don't get mad, and everyone needs them sometimes, even if they don't want to buy them." She didn't say that part. She didn't need to. Ethan swallowed. "Do you ever keep one for yourself?" She nodded. "One." He waited. "In case someone cries," she added. That was when Ethan understood, truly understood, that the tissues were never about money. They were about being useful, about earning the right to exist somewhere. Ethan drove home alone that evening. Not because he wanted silence, but because he needed to hear his own thoughts clearly for the first time in years. Lila's words stayed with him. "I have places. Not a home, not a person, just places." That night he asked his legal assistant to pull some information. Quietly. No names spoken out loud. Hypothetically, he said, if a child has no registered guardian, What happens? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Usually the assistant replied carefully, "They're placed under temporary oversight. Moved as needed." Moved. And if someone wanted to help, Ethan asked. "Help how? Not with money," he said. "With responsibility." Another pause. Longer this time. "That requires paperwork," the assistant said. "Commitment. And time. Time again." Ethan thought of the way Lila counted people, the way she measured when to leave before being told. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. After hanging up, Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. The tissue was still there, folded, untouched. For the first time, he unfolded it completely. On the inside corner, barely visible, was a small pen mark, like someone had tested if the ink worked. A reminder. He stood by the window watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Somewhere out there, a little girl was choosing where she was allowed to exist tonight. And for the first time, Ethan understood something he couldn't escape anymore. If he walked away now, this silence would be his fault too. The next morning, Ethan returned to the building on foot. He told himself it was just curiosity, a final check, a way to clear his mind. But his pace betrayed him faster than usual, sharper at every step, eyes scanning the sidewalk before he even reached the entrance. Lila wasn't there. Not by the doors, not at the corner, not near the alley where she'd been pushed last time. For a moment he stood still, surrounded by people who flowed around him like water around a stone. He took a breath and stepped inside. The lobby smelled like polished marble and expensive coffee. Everything here was designed to feel permanent, except the people who didn't belong. At the security desk, he saw the same guard from before. The man looked up, surprised to see Ethan without his driver. "Morning, Mr. Cole." Ethan nodded. "That girl, the one who sells tissues outside." The guard's expression tightened, not in anger, more like discomfort. The look people wore when they knew something and wished they didn't. "You mean the kid?" he asked. "Yes." "Where is she?" The guard glanced toward the glass doors. "She's not supposed to be here anymore." Ethan followed his gaze. There was a printed notice taped to the inside of the entrance, white paper on gleaming glass, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. "No soliciting, no loitering, violators will be reported." Ethan stared at the words. It wasn't cruel. It was clean, official, neutral. And somehow that made it worse. "Reported to who?" he asked quietly. The guard shifted his weight. "City services. If someone keeps ignoring warnings, we have to do something." "Who complained?" Ethan asked. The guard hesitated. "A tenant. Someone said it made the entrance look unprofessional." Unprofessional. Ethan felt heat rise behind his eyes, the kind that wasn't sadness. It was something sharper, a quiet anger that had nowhere to go. "She never bothered anyone," he said. "I know," the guard replied, lowering his voice. "She was polite. She always moved when asked." "Then why report her?" The guard let out a slow breath. "Because that's the rule, sir. And because if we don't, it becomes our problem." Ethan held the guard's gaze. "She's a child." The guard looked down for a second. "That's why we tried to warn her first." Ethan walked back outside. The air hit his face cold and bright. He looked down the block again, then further past the cafe, past the bus stop toward the overpass. He started walking. Halfway there, he saw a city van parked near the curb. Two people in plain jackets stood beside it, talking to someone Ethan couldn't see. His stomach tightened. He moved faster. Then the crowd shifted, and he saw her. Lila stood near the curb with her tissues gathered tightly in her arms. A woman with a clipboard spoke to her in a voice that wasn't harsh, just brisk. Professional. Lila nodded over and over, the way she always did. Ethan stopped a few feet away, suddenly aware of how loud his own breathing sounded. The woman turned slightly, noticing him. "Can I help you?" she asked. Ethan swallowed. I think I can help her. Lila's eyes flicked up, and for the first time since he'd known her, she didn't look calm. She looked afraid. Not of the woman. Of what came next. Ethan stepped closer, careful not to startle Lila. The woman with the clipboard adjusted her stance, blocking the curb as if that was her job. She wasn't hostile. She was efficient, the kind of person trained to keep emotions out of her work. I'm with community outreach, she said. We received a report about a minor soliciting in this area. She isn't harming anyone, Ethan replied, voice steady. We're not saying she is, the woman said. But she can't stay here unsupervised. Ethan glanced at Lila. She held the tissues like a shield. Her shoulders were tight, her chin slightly lowered. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. She was bracing. Where are you taking her? Ethan asked. To a temporary placement center, the woman replied. They'll evaluate her situation and determine next steps. Lila flinched at the phrase next steps, like it meant something she understood too well. Ethan's jaw tightened. Is she in danger? No, the woman said. She'll be safe. But she needs an adult responsible for her. A guardian. Someone accountable. The word landed heavy. Ethan looked at Lila again. Do you know them? He asked gently. Lila shook her head once. Have you been taken before? He asked even more softly. Her fingers tightened around the tissue packs. She stared at the ground for a long moment. Then she nodded. Very small. Ethan's chest tightened in a way he hadn't expected. The woman checked her clipboard. Ma'am, she addressed Lila, we need to go. Lila took a half step toward the van. Then she stopped. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan, not desperate, not dramatic, just searching. Like she was trying to calculate if this was real or another moment she'd regret believing in. Sir, she whispered, barely audible over the street noise. Ethan leaned down slightly. She hesitated, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. Not with tears, but with effort. Do people change their minds? After they say yes? The question punched the air out of him. Ethan stared at her, understanding everything that question carried. How many times she'd heard yes and then watched it turn into no. How many times kindness had been offered and then withdrawn. How many times she'd learned that hope was the most dangerous thing to hold. Ethan stood up and faced the outreach worker. I'm Ethan Cole, he said. I can have my legal team here within an hour. I want to take responsibility for her today. The woman blinked, her professionalism faltering for just a second. Sir, you can't just— I'm not asking to bypass procedure, Ethan cut in. I'm asking to start it immediately, right now. The woman's gaze sharpened. Are you a relative? No. Then you can't remove her from our process without documentation. Temporary guardianship requires verification, a background check, consent forms. Then tell me what you need. Ethan said, voice low, controlled. And I'll give you everything. But she is not getting into that van without knowing what happens next. The outreach worker studied him. She wasn't moved by wealth. She was moved by liability. Sir, she said carefully, are you prepared for what responsibility means? This isn't charity. Ethan looked down at Lila again. She didn't beg. She just stood there, small and quiet, waiting for the world to decide if she mattered. Ethan's voice softened. I'm prepared. Lila's eyes lifted. Not hopeful yet. Just listening. For the first time, Ethan realized the truth that should have been obvious from the start. The city hadn't been trying to hurt her. The city had just been trying to move her, and too many adults had let that be enough. They didn't take Lila. Not that morning. The outreach worker made a call, then another. She spoke in short phrases that sounded like policy codes and timeframes, the kind of language that made people feel safe because it removed the mess of human emotion. Finally, she looked at Ethan. Here's what we can do, she said. She can remain where she is for now under our supervision if you agree to initiate emergency sponsorship evaluation. You'll need to come with us to sign preliminary forms today. Ethan nodded immediately. Tell me where. The woman turned to Lila. Sweetheart, you're not in trouble. We just need to make sure you're okay. Lila nodded once, automatic. Ethan crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. I'm going with them, he said, voice calm. You're not being taken away alone. Lila didn't answer right away. Then she asked almost too quietly to hear, do you have to do that? Ethan swallowed. He could have lied, could have made it sound easy. But Lila had built her entire life around adults who said things they didn't mean. So he chose the truth. I don't have to, he said. I'm choosing to. Lila stared at him as if she'd never heard those words used that way before. The outreach worker cleared her throat. We can't promise outcomes today. This is the first step. Ethan stood. Then we take the first step. They rode in separate vehicles. Policy. Procedure. Ethan followed the van to a municipal building that smelled like paper and old air conditioning. The lobby was crowded with tired faces, people holding folders like shields. In a small office, a clerk slid a stack of forms across the desk. Ethan read every page. Not because he needed to, because he wanted to. The questions were blunt. Do you understand the responsibilities of sponsorship? Do you acknowledge this process may take time? Do you agree to cooperate with assessments and home visits? Ethan's pen hovered over the signature line. For a moment, he saw himself the way Lila had probably seen him on day one, another adult with power, another person who could walk away. He signed anyway. The clerk stamped the papers. The sound was sharp and final, like a door closing, except this time it sounded like a door opening. Across the room, Lila sat in a chair too big for her feet, not touching the floor. She held her tissue packs in her lap, fingers curled around them, as if letting go might undo everything. Ethan walked over and sat in the chair beside her. Not across, not above, beside. Lila glanced at him. You're still here, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. I told you I would be. She hesitated. Then slowly she pulled one tissue pack from her lap and placed it between them on the seat, like an offering, like a bridge. Ethan looked at it, then at her. Why, he asked softly. Lila's voice was barely a whisper. In case it gets hard. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't take the pack. He just let it sit there, a small, fragile promise in a building full of paperwork. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan understood what money had never been able to buy him. A second chance earned one careful choice at a time. The file was thinner than Ethan expected. No dramatic headlines, no red stamps, no bold warnings. Just a pale folder with Lila's name typed neatly on the tab, as if she were a routine entry one among many. Ethan sat across from the case coordinator in a small office that smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. She's considered low risk, the woman said, flipping through the pages. No behavioral issues, no incidents. Low risk. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? It means she adapts, the coordinator replied. She doesn't resist transitions. She follows instructions. She understands boundaries. Ethan's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the desk. That sounds like a good thing, he said. It is, the woman replied automatically. In our system. She glanced down at the file again. Children like Lila are easier to place temporarily. They don't require immediate intervention. Why not? Ethan asked. The coordinator hesitated, then answered honestly. Because they don't ask for much. The words hit harder than any accusation. Ethan looked at the page again. There were notes written in careful, neutral language. Quiet, compliant, self-sufficient. Nowhere did it say alone. Has anyone asked her what she wants? Ethan asked. The coordinator paused. She hasn't expressed strong preferences. Ethan exhaled slowly. She wouldn't, he said. The coordinator looked up, curious. She's learned that wanting things makes adults uncomfortable. Ethan continued. So she stopped. The woman didn't argue, she just closed the folder gently. We can schedule a home assessment, she said. If you're serious. I am, Ethan replied. That afternoon, Lila sat in the waiting area outside the office, legs swinging slightly, feet still not touching the floor. She watched people come and go. Adults signed papers. Children clutched toys. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something. Ethan sat beside her again. They asked a lot of questions, he said. Lila nodded. They always do. Did they ask you anything? She thought for a moment. They asked if I'm okay, and I said yes. Ethan didn't smile. Were you? He asked gently. Lila hesitated, then she answered the way she always did. I'm okay enough, the phrase echoed in Ethan's mind long after the words were spoken. Okay enough, the kind of answer that kept systems moving, the kind that kept children invisible. The first home visit happened 3 days later. No announcements, no ceremony, just a woman with a clipboard, another with a tablet, and Ethan opening the door to a space that had never been prepared for a child before. Lila stepped inside slowly. She didn't rush, didn't explore. She stood just inside the doorway, eyes scanning the floor like she was measuring something invisible. You can come in, Ethan said softly. She took one step forward, then another, each step deliberate. The caseworker smiled. You can take off your shoes if you like. Lila froze. Her eyes dropped to her worn sneakers. I'm okay, she said quickly. Ethan noticed her hands curl slightly at her sides. It's fine either way, the woman added kindly. Lila shook her head. I'll keep them on. She stayed close to the wall as they walked through the apartment. Not touching anything, not asking questions. Ethan realized she wasn't looking at the furniture. She was watching the floor. At one point, she pressed her foot down twice in the same spot, like she was testing if it would hold. Is it strong? She asked quietly. The floor, Ethan asked. She nodded. Yes, he said. It's not going anywhere. She absorbed that information carefully, like it mattered more than it should have. In the living room, the caseworker asked, Do you like it here? Lila didn't answer right away. She looked at Ethan, then at the door, then back at the floor. It's quiet, she said finally. That's good, right? The woman asked. Lila considered the question. Yes, she replied. Quiet means people aren't upset. The caseworker wrote something down. Ethan felt something twist inside him. Later, when the women had left, Ethan offered Lila a glass of water. She accepted it with both hands. You don't have to stand, he said. You can sit. She glanced at the couch, then lowered herself onto the edge, perched, not relaxed. After a moment, she shifted slightly, then again. Finally, she stood back up. Did I do something wrong? She asked quickly. No, Ethan said immediately. Why would you think that? She shrugged. People usually tell me if I sit too long. Ethan swallowed. Here, he said gently, you don't get in trouble for taking up space. Lila looked at him, confusion flickering across her face, like he'd spoken a language she'd never been taught. That night, Lila didn't unpack. She placed her small bag beside the bed and left it zipped, sitting on the floor instead. Ethan noticed but didn't comment. He made dinner simple, quiet, nothing that smelled too strong. Lila ate slowly, watching his hands more than the food. You don't have to finish, Ethan said. She nodded. I know, but she finished anyway. Afterward, Ethan handed her a folded blanket. For later, he said. She took it, fingers brushing the fabric cautiously. Is this mine? She asked. Yes. Her brow furrowed. Just mine, yes. She stared at the blanket for a long moment. Then she folded it again, smaller, tighter. I'll use it later, she said. Ethan didn't argue. Before bed, Lila stood in the doorway of the guest room. She didn't go in. She just stood there, eyes fixed on the light switch. "Do I need to turn it off?" she asked. "You can leave it on if you want," Ethan said. She nodded. "Okay." Then, almost as an afterthought, she asked, "If I wake up, will you still be here?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He knew better now than to rush promises. "Yes," he said finally. "I will." Lila studied his face not for warmth, but for consistency. Satisfied, she nodded once and stepped inside the room. Later, when Ethan passed by, he noticed the door was still slightly open, the light still on. Lila lay on top of the bed blanket, folded beside her, shoes still on. Not asleep, just waiting. Ethan leaned against the hallway wall, heart heavy and steady at the same time. This wasn't about saving a child. It was about staying long enough for her to believe she didn't need to be saved. And for the first time, Ethan understood the real cost of the choice he'd made, not money, not paperwork, but patience. The next phase of the process didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in a bright office with soft chairs and framed posters about stability and safety, as if good design could make hard decisions feel easier. Ethan sat across from a family assessor named Marisol Grant. She had calm eyes, the kind that didn't judge quickly, but didn't forget anything either. A tablet rested on her lap. A folder rested on the table. "Mr. Cole," she began, "thank you for your cooperation so far." Ethan nodded. "I want to do this properly." Marisol's smile was polite, measured. "That's what I need to hear, and also what I need to confirm." "Confirm, not assume, not admire. Confirm." She asked about his schedule, his travel, his support system. "Who will be present when you're not?" she said. "I can adjust my schedule," Ethan replied. "And I have a small team, house manager, driver, assistant, people I trust." Marisol tapped something onto her screen. "Those people are employees." "Yes," Ethan said carefully. "What happens when an employee resigns?" Ethan paused. "We replace them." Marisol looked up. "Children aren't replaceable, Mr. Cole." The words weren't cruel. They were clean, like the sign on the glass doors had been. Ethan's throat tightened. "I know," Marisol continued. "You've been described as highly capable, highly driven, successful. That often comes with a pattern." What pattern? Ethan asked, though he already felt the answer circling. "You solve problems quickly," she said. "You delegate. You move forward. And when things become inconvenient, you can, without meaning to, move past them." Ethan held her gaze. "That was me," he admitted. "Before." Marisol didn't argue. She just nodded, as if she'd expected honesty to be the first test. "And Lila," she said, opening the folder, "has a pattern too." Ethan's attention sharpened. "She complies," Marisol said. "She adjusts. She doesn't demand. She doesn't protest. Which might feel easy. At first." "At first." Ethan swallowed. "It's not easy," he said quietly. "It's alarming." Marisol studied him for a beat. "Good. That means you're seeing it." She leaned back slightly. "Now we need to talk about suitability." Ethan's chest tightened again. "In our system," Marisol continued, "there are families who have been waiting for years. Some with experience, some with full-time caregivers, some with multiple children already placed." Ethan's jaw flexed. "Are you saying she should go to them?" "I'm saying you're not the only option," Marisol replied, voice steady. "And Lila deserves the best option, not the fastest." Fastest. The word hit him like a mirror. Because he had been fast to dismiss, fast to walk past, fast to let her become invisible. Marisol stood and walked toward the window, as if giving him space to breathe. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll do an observational visit. You and Lila in your environment. We'll speak with her, separately." Ethan nodded. "Whatever you need." Marisol's tone softened by half a degree. "This isn't punishment. This is protection." Ethan looked down at his hands. I know, he said. When he returned home, Lila was in the living room, sitting on the carpet with a pencil and a sheet of paper. She wasn't drawing a house or hearts or family figures. She was drawing a simple grid. Boxes, neat lines. Order. What's that? Ethan asked. Lila glanced up. It's a map, she said. A map of where to put things, she answered. So I don't do it wrong. Ethan's heart tightened. You're not doing anything wrong, he said gently. You're allowed to be here. Lila hesitated. Her pencil hovered. Allowed, she repeated quietly like she was trying the word in her mouth. Ethan sat down on the floor a few feet away, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to disappear. Tomorrow someone is coming, he said. They'll ask questions. Lila's shoulders stiffened. Am I in trouble? She asked. No, Ethan said quickly. You're not in trouble. They just want to make sure you're safe. She nodded, then asked in the smallest voice, safe from what Ethan didn't answer right away. Because the truth was sometimes the thing children needed protection from wasn't danger. It was losing what they'd finally started to believe in. The next day, the apartment felt different. Not because anything had changed, because everything suddenly mattered. Ethan kept the morning simple. Toast, fruit, warm tea, nothing that looked like a performance. Lila sat at the table, hands folded, posture careful. She wore the same sweater she'd chosen yesterday, the one that didn't stand out. Ethan noticed. He didn't comment. At 10 o'clock, Marisol arrived with another staff member, a note-taker named Kevin. They smiled politely, shoes off at the door, clipboards tucked under their arms. Thank you for having us, Marisol said. Ethan nodded. Of course. Lila didn't speak. She watched. Marisol crouched slightly to Lila's level. Hi, Lila. I'm Marisol. We met at the office. Can we talk a little today? Lila nodded. Would you like to sit here? Marisol asked gently, or in the living room? Lila glanced at Ethan first. Then she said, Here is okay. Marisol's gaze flicked to Ethan for a fraction of a second, an evaluator's glance, not a judgment. Ethan stayed seated, hands visible, voice quiet. They asked Lila light questions first. What she liked to read. Whether she preferred the window open or closed. If she liked quiet music or silence. Lila answered carefully, like she was choosing safe words. Then Marisol asked, What happens when you're upset? Lila paused. I don't get upset. Marisol's face remained calm. Everyone gets upset sometimes. Lila looked down. I wait. Wait for what? Marisol asked. Layla's fingers pressed into each other. For it to be over. Kevin's pen scratched on paper. Ethan felt the urge to speak, to defend her, to explain what he'd already learned, but he stayed still. He remembered what Marisol had implied. This was about protection, not persuasion. Marisol asked, How do you feel about Mr. Cole? Lila's eyes flicked to Ethan, then away. He's kind, she said. Kind how? Marisol asked. Lila hesitated, searching. He doesn't get mad when I ask questions, she said softly. And he stays. Marisol nodded gently, letting that word land. Then she said, We also want to talk to you alone for a few minutes, Lila. Is that okay? Lila's head snapped up. Not fear, not panic. Something quieter, like a door closing in her mind. Ethan saw her grip tighten under the table. Marisol added quickly, Mr. Cole will be right outside the room. You can see him whenever you want. This is just so you can speak freely. Lila stared at the doorway. Ethan stood slowly. I'll be right there, he said, voice steady. You won't be alone. Lila swallowed. She nodded. But Ethan saw it, how she tracked him as he walked to the hallway, how she kept her eyes on him like a lifeline. 10 minutes passed. Ethan heard low voices through the door, words too soft to make out. Then he heard silence. Another 10 minutes. Ethan stayed standing in the same spot, not checking his phone, not taking calls, not moving. When the door finally opened, Lila stepped out first. Her face was composed. Too composed. Marisol followed, expression neutral. "Thank you," she said to Ethan. Ethan nodded once. "Of course." Marisol's tone shifted slightly. "We'll need to discuss next steps." Ethan's chest tightened. Lila looked up at him. "Next steps," she repeated in a whisper like she'd heard the phrase before, and it had never meant anything good. Ethan crouched down, careful not to grab her, not to corner her. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "you won't have to handle it alone." Lila stared at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she'd come into his life, her voice wasn't perfectly controlled. "What if they say I have to go?" she asked. The question didn't sound like fear. It sounded like a memory. That evening after the caseworkers left, Ethan didn't pretend he wasn't nervous. He didn't mask it with confidence. Lila had seen too many adults perform certainty and then disappear. He made dinner slowly, letting the kitchen fill with warm, ordinary smells. Lila sat at the counter watching him slice vegetables with careful attention. At one point, she said, "They asked me if I feel safe here." Ethan nodded. "And what did you say?" "I said yes," Lila replied. Ethan exhaled softly. "Good." Lila stared at the counter for a moment. Then she added, "But I didn't know what they meant." Ethan's hand paused mid-motion. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. Lila kept her eyes down. "Safe. Like I won't get hurt." Ethan's voice stayed calm. "Safe like you won't be left." Silence. Lila's shoulders lifted slightly, then dropped like her body had been holding that word back. "I don't know how to tell," she whispered. Ethan set the knife down carefully and turned toward her fully. "You don't have to know right away," he said. "You can take time." Lila swallowed. Time is when people change their minds. There it was. Not the polite version, not the "I'm okay enough," the real thing. Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. "Has that happened to you?" Lila nodded once. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. He could already see the pattern. Promises that sounded warm, then silence, then movement, then next steps. Ethan leaned against the counter, voice steady. "Lila, I can't control every decision other people make. But I can control mine." Lila's eyes lifted to his for a fraction of a second, then dropped again. "I'm not asking you to trust me today," Ethan continued. "I'm asking you to watch what I do." Lila's fingers toyed with the edge of her sleeve. After dinner, Ethan set a small notebook on the table. "What's that?" Lila asked. "It's for questions," he said. "Any question you have, you can write it down. You don't have to ask out loud if it's hard." Lila stared at the notebook as if it were a strange gift. Then she asked quietly, "What if I write too many?" Ethan's throat tightened. "You can't write too many," he said. "That's not a thing here." Lila nodded slowly, absorbing the concept like it was foreign. Later, as Ethan walked past her room, he noticed the door was more closed than before, not shut, but closer. A small change. He paused. "Good night," he said softly. A moment passed. Then from inside, a voice, thin, uncertain, answered, "Good night." Ethan stood there in the hallway, still as stone. Because that single word didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like practice. And Ethan understood with a clarity that made his chest ache. If the system decided Lila fit better somewhere else, it would not be a paperwork problem. It would be a wound. He turned and went to his study, opened his laptop, and typed one sentence to his legal team. "We need to move faster. Do not delay." For the first time, Ethan wasn't rushing past something. He was rushing toward it. The meeting happened on a quiet afternoon. No courtroom, no raised voices. Just a long table, 3 chairs, and a stack of documents that felt heavier than they looked. Marisol sat across from Ethan, Kevin beside her. Lila waited in the adjacent room with a book she wasn't reading. We've completed our assessments, Marisol said. There is another option we're required to present. Ethan nodded once. I expected that. A licensed family. Marisol continued. 2 caregivers, flexible schedules, experience with long-term placement, better on paper. Marisol watched Ethan closely. They're considered a strong match. Ethan leaned forward. And Lila, she didn't object, Marisol replied carefully. Ethan's jaw tightened. She wouldn't. Silence settled between them. This isn't about capability, Marisol said. It's about permanence. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then make it permanent. Marisol blinked. You understand what that means? I do, Ethan said. I won't sponsor temporarily. I won't defer. I'm requesting full guardianship proceedings. Kevin's pen stopped. Marisol studied him. That's not a small decision. I know, Ethan replied. That's why I'm not asking anyone else to make it. Marisol leaned back, assessing not his wealth, but his resolve. There will be oversight, she said. Reviews, adjustments. This won't be simple. Ethan nodded. I'm not looking for simple. After a moment, Marisol closed the folder. Then we proceed, she said. With you. Ethan stood, not triumphant, not relieved, just steady. He walked to the waiting room and knelt in front of Lila. They asked me a lot of questions, he said. Lila nodded, eyes searching. I answered, he continued, and I stayed. Lila didn't smile, but she didn't look away. The weeks that followed were quiet. Not empty, just steady. Forms were signed, visits scheduled, routines adjusted. Ethan changed his calendar first. Meetings moved, trips shortened, dinners stayed at home. Lila noticed everything. She noticed when he came back at the time he said he would. When he remembered the library day. When he didn't rush her answers. One evening, as Ethan packed away groceries, Lila stood nearby holding her notebook. Can I ask one, she said. Anytime he replied. She hesitated. If they call again and say something changed, Ethan set the bag down and turned to her fully. Then I answer again, he said. The same way. How, she asked. By staying, he replied. Lila considered this. Later that night, she placed her shoes neatly by the door, not hidden, not ready to run, just placed. On another day, Marisol returned alone. She observed quietly, asked few questions. At the door, she paused. You know, she said to Ethan, children like Lila don't need grand gestures. I know, Ethan replied. They need consistency, Marisol continued. Over time. Ethan nodded. I'm not in a hurry anymore. Marisol looked back into the apartment where Lila sat at the table writing. For what it's worth, she said, she's stopped asking when things end. Ethan didn't answer. He just watched Lila turn a page. The final confirmation came in an envelope. No dramatic announcement, no applause. Just words on paper stamped and signed. Ethan read it once, then again. He didn't rush to Lila. He waited until dinner was over, until the dishes were done, until the day felt ordinary enough to hold something permanent. Lila, he said gently, there's something I want you to know. She looked up from her notebook. They're done asking questions, he continued, and I'm done answering them. She frowned slightly. Is that good? Ethan nodded. It means I'm your guardian. Silence. Lila didn't react right away. She stared at the table, at her hands. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small tissue pack, the same kind she used to sell. She placed it on the table between them. I kept one, she said quietly. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Why? Lila thought for a moment. In case someone needs it, she said. But I don't think it's for me anymore. Ethan nodded, eyes shining. You don't have to give it away, he said. She smiled just a little. Later that night, as Ethan passed her room, he noticed the door was closed. Completely. The light was off. Lila was asleep, not waiting. Ethan stood there for a long moment, hand resting against the wall. Once he had walked past a little girl selling tissues. Now he understood what that moment had asked of him all along. Not pity, not charity. Just the courage to stop and stay. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.